Now recently I bought a homage to the Serica 5303 and I came up with a bunch of reasons why I bought the homage over the original. But now I've been able to get the original in hand, I've been able to borrow it, and I want to see if I actually made the right decision buying the homage over the original. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about watches. And today, I'm talking about a watch that I've been able to borrow from Jason from Houtman Watches. Jason has been such a good supporter of the channel by lending me a lot of his own personal watches, so I do appreciate it. I really do. I will leave a link to his website down below if you want to check out his own watches, because they're one of my favorite micro-brand watches that I've ever personally come across. But today, I'm talking about the Serica 5303. A watch that really grabbed my attention when I first saw it. A watch that I've almost bought myself, but I ended up buying the homage version of it. Now, I'm going to make a video that's put these watches physically side by side and answer the question, did I buy the right one or should I have bought the original? But today, I want to check out this watch in detail. Now, as always, whenever I borrow a watch, I'm not regularly wearing it. I do not want to damage a watch that I've borrowed. So this is a sort of a first impressions / review, not a long-term review. So please keep that in mind. But this watch, if you are going to buy it, costs over €1,000. And I do want to talk about that price a little bit more, and I'll say that and I'll talk about that at the end of the video. But let's jump into this sort of review, first impressions video, and let's flip the camera and check it out. So if you want to buy one of these Sericas 5303, it's going to cost you €1,075. But first of all, you're going to get put on a waiting list because you can't buy them straight away. But on paper, if you do decide to purchase one, you get a fair bit with it. Get a nice case, 2-year warranty, Swiss-made automatic movement, 300 meters of water resistance, a double-domed sapphire crystal, and you get to choose between a right-handed and a left-handed crown. And there's also a couple of different color options. This obviously is the black with the black ceramic bezel insert. But all of them come with the exact same dimensions, doesn't matter which option you choose. That being the case is 38.8 millimeters. The thickness of the watch is 12.3 millimeters. The lug to lug is 46.2 millimeters. Has a 20 millimeter lug width, and coming on this lovely mesh strap, which I'm not sure why you'd ever change it off with this one because it's so lovely, it's 114 grams. But those numbers really don't represent this watch as well as other watches that those sort of dimensions would represent, because those dimensions are great, 38 by around about 46. Nice dimensions, nice on wrist. You can sort of feel what it's going to be like, except this watch, because when you get it in hand, when you put it on wrist, there is something that stands out dramatically for me, and that is the dial size. You may not be able to see it on the video. I certainly didn't really experience it or understand it until I had this watch in hand, but the dial on this watch is really small. Small comparative to the overall dimensions of the watch, because when you measure the actual dial itself, we're looking at 26 millimeters. Now, I want to put that into comparison with another similar size watch just to show you what I mean by this. Putting it side by side with my Roland homage watch, this has the exact same sort of dimensions as this watch, almost exactly the same. But check out the dial size difference, 26 millimeters versus 29 millimeters. This feels normal, this feels right. Next to this one, this feels small. Now, I'm not going to be saying that as a bad thing. Please don't take that as a negative, but it is something that really stands out, and it is something that you should really consider if you are considering this watch, because it is something that glares at you as soon as you pull this one out of the box and stick it on wrist. And you can see it really dramatically when you put a watch of similar size next to it. Let's focus in on that slightly smaller dial because it is gorgeous, both the design and the execution. Everything on there is printed. We've got the white lines, we've got the white sort of minute track, we've got the lines coming up to those lume pips, which are all loomed obviously. Text on there, it's 300 meters of water resistance, Serica Swiss down the bottom there. The hands, I really like the hands. It is like a painted on white, but it is a really sort of glossy white, including that nice long glossy white second hand. I like the design of the hands, and they really stand out very well compared to that black dial. You can see it is super legible. There's lots of lume on there as well, and the lume is really good, really impressive, And it also looks really cool because of the design of that dial. Outside of that dial, we have one of my favorite sort of design elements of this watch and a couple of others that I have experienced, and that is this sort of dual bezel with the stainless steel and then a sort of a black insert there. I really like that sort of two tones on the bezel. Very cool. It is a solid bezel though, so the stainless steel part of it does move as well. And when you do turn that bezel, it is beautiful. It's one of the better bezel actions I've ever experienced. Really feels like a high-end sort of luxury watch. That lovely clicking, muted, soft, and gentle, but also doesn't feel like it's going to move or knock, which is cool. What I do like also is the lume pip is sort of inset into that bezel as well, making it nice and smooth when you put your hands across it, not something that is sticking up. It's covered by a double dome sapphire crystal, which gives you a little bit of distortions on the edge, which I think really adds to the character of this watch, which is very, very cool. And when you then transition down to the side of it, you can see it has a coin edge bezel, making it very easy to grab onto. And then it has some really nice mixture of brushed, polished, and brushed. And the brushing is done really well. The polishing is done really well. And the transitions between the two is a standout feature. You really notice the quality of the transitions between the different surfaces, especially when you put it side by side with another watch. But then that kind of leads you onto one of the big features of this watch, or something that stands out big to me, and that is these integrated lugs. And they are done really nicely, very soft, work really well, very well inset into the case as well, no movement whatsoever. I think it is a great design element, but it also sort of solves an issue between a different type of sort of strap here going into a case without just having that solid end. So I think it's a really good idea, and I think it looks great too. The crown is actually quite large, it's unsigned, very easy to grab hold of, however, but you'll see that it actually sticks out from the case a tiny fraction. Not so much that it really is noticeable, but if you look really closely, you'll see it. It is screwed down. As I mentioned, this one has 300 meters of water resistance, pops out nicely. It is hand winding and has a very interesting hand winding action. It actually reminds me a little bit of my vintage watches. It has a very click, 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 click feel. It's subtle, but it is there. Different to some of my other sort of Swiss watches that I own. Now this watch in particular, this movement is known to have a few issues, and I've noticed those issues with this one as well, but not a lot. When you pull the crown out, it should hack the movement, and it does. However, I've played with this movement and this crown a bit, and I would say about 9 times out of 10, it hacks the movement. But there's that 1 time out of 10 that it fails to hack the movement. And occasionally, when you pop it back in again, it does move the hands a little bit, but not too often. I know some have had an issue where you pop the crown back in and it moves the minute hand. This one only on the very odd occasions. But let's talk about this mesh bracelet because it is beautiful, very soft, very well done. There's a little bit of taper as well. Nice clean end. If you look at the very end though, there is a little bit of a interesting sort of look there. As you can see, it's been squished down. Nothing that you'd sort of notice or concerned about. Underneath, there's all those ridges there for your adjustment. The clasp is nice. It is unsigned. It is brushed. Very nicely executed. And the case back is actually fairly simple. It's got some information there about the watch and the company. Talks about it being 300 meters water resistance, but there's not too much to look there, but it's all brushed, which is good. So you're not going to worry too much about scratches or scuffs on the back there. And on the wrist, with the case dimensions like this, as I would expect, it fits very, very nicely on my 6 3/4 or around about 17 centimeter wrist. You can see it sits up a little bit, but it really is not noticeable. What is noticeable, however, as I've mentioned, is the dial is quite small. Again, not a bad thing, just something I want to point out because it's not something that really stood out to me when I was looking into this watch, but it absolutely stands out to me when I have it on wrist. So something definitely to be aware of. So what do I like about this watch? What don't I like about it? And what would I change? And it starts definitely with a big plus of the looks and the design. This is a beautiful watch. There's a reason why it grabbed my attention. It is a reason why it has held my attention. It is a reason why I think so many people are interested in this watch. But the quality of this watch also is a standout feature and is noticeable when it is in hand. And that bezel action, it is a really big positive and certainly stands out when you use it. So what don't I like? Well, the dial size, as I said, is not so much a negative, But for me, I find that I keep looking at it thinking, oh, that's a little bit small. And that's why I have mentioned it a few times. Also, that movement, I think it's an okay movement. I've got no issues with that movement, but it's not perfect. And I'm not quite sure why they've chosen to go with that one when there are other Swiss movements out there that perhaps are a little bit more reliable, a little bit more better known, that doesn't have those inherent issues that I've even noticed with this one. And I guess the case back is a little bit basic. I don't really have anything against a basic case back, but I guess they could have done something a little bit more interesting. Since there's so many interesting points about this watch, I guess it probably doesn't need it, but just something worth mentioning. So what would I change about this? Well, there's two things I would change. I personally would like to see that dial just a touch bigger, just to take away from that sort of thing that I keep pointing at and keep thinking about. And personally, I would put an ETA movement in here, or another Swiss movement that is well known, that doesn't have any inherent issues, that is also probably easier to get serviced as well. But let's quickly talk about the price of this watch, because it's 1,075 euros. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, that's a little bit expensive, but it's not hugely expensive. But it was certainly enough money that it concerned me a little bit. When I got the watch in hand, I then sort of understood a little bit better that at price tag sort of does match the quality of this watch. When you do compare it against other watches, the quality and the feel of them, this one, I guess the price does seem to fit it quite well. But the problem is, I guess, when you are then comparing against other watches, because at that sort of price, there's a lot of watches. There's Christopher Wards, there's Hamiltons, there's Tissot's that are much cheaper, there's Longines. There's other watches that are out there that may offer better value, but I'm not sure if they'll offer you the looks of this watch. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks again to Jason for lending me his personal watch, and maybe check these videos out next.